In the quiet suburbs of a small Midwestern town, where neighbors still wave from their porches and kids ride bikes until sunset, nobody expected the events that unfolded at the local police station on that chilly autumn morning. The glass doors burst open as a breathless 8-year-old boy, with tousled brown hair and tear-stained cheeks, ran straight to the front desk. His small hands gripped the counter's edge as he looked up at the startled desk sergeant and uttered words that would change multiple lives forever. "Please arrest my dad." The officers present that morning would later recall how the boy's voice trembled, not with fear, but with a determination far beyond his years. His sneakers were muddy, his backpack still hanging off one shoulder, clear signs of his urgent journey to the station. What could drive a child to turn in his own father? The answer would reveal an unexpected story of courage, compassion, and a kind of love that transcends conventional understanding. Just hours earlier, this same boy had been sitting at his kitchen table, pushing around the scrambled eggs on his plate, while his father prepared for another day at work. Their modest 2-story house, with its peeling paint and overgrown lawn, held secrets that weighed heavily on the young boy's conscience. For weeks, he had been struggling with something he'd discovered, something that kept him awake at night, tossing and turning in his race car-themed bed. The relationship between father and son had always been complicated. Since Mom's departure 2 years ago, they'd developed their own routine: weekend fishing trips, pizza Fridays, and their special handshake that always ended with a fist bump. The boy's teachers often commented on how well-adjusted he seemed despite the challenges at home. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing, one that would soon catch everyone off guard. What the officers discovered that morning would not only challenge their professional experience, but also touch their hearts in unexpected ways. The boy's story unfolded like a puzzle, each piece revealing a deeper truth about family, moral courage, and the wisdom that sometimes comes from the most unexpected sources. As the child spoke, the hardened police officers found themselves exchanging glances, moved by the pure intentions behind his desperate act. The most remarkable aspect wasn't just what the boy had done, but why he had done it. In a world where we often hear about children being led astray or making poor choices, here was a young soul who understood right from wrong with crystal clarity. His actions would soon ripple through the community, touching lives far beyond the walls of that police station. But perhaps the most profound part of this story lies in what happened next. A series of events that would challenge our assumptions about family, redemption, and the power of truth told through the eyes of a child. As news spread through the town, people began to question their own beliefs about judgment, forgiveness, and the complex bonds between parents and children. Standing there in the police station, with his superhero t-shirt and scuffed sneakers, this young boy had no idea that his brave decision would spark a chain of events that would impact not just his family, but an entire community. His story serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the biggest acts of courage come from the smallest hearts, and that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. As the officers began to process what they were hearing, none of them could have predicted how this story would unfold, or how it would challenge everything they thought they knew about family dynamics and moral choices. The real question wasn't just why this young boy wanted his father arrested. It was what happened next that would leave everyone speechless. In the quiet suburbs of a small Midwestern town, where neighbors still wave from their porches and kids ride bikes until sunset, nobody expected the events that unfolded at the local police station on that chilly autumn morning. The glass doors burst open as a breathless 8-year-old boy, with tousled brown hair and tear-stained cheeks, ran straight to the front desk. His small hands gripped the counter's edge as he looked up at the startled desk sergeant and uttered words that would change multiple lives forever. "Please arrest my dad." The officers present that morning would later recall how the boy's voice trembled, not with fear, but with a determination far beyond his years. His sneakers were muddy, his backpack still hanging off one shoulder, clear signs of his urgent journey to the station. What could drive a child to turn in his own father? The answer would reveal an unexpected story of courage, compassion, and a kind of love that transcends conventional understanding. Just hours earlier, this same boy had been sitting at his kitchen table, pushing around the scrambled eggs on his plate, while his father prepared for another day at work. Their modest 2-story house, with its peeling paint and overgrown lawn, held secrets that weighed heavily on the young boy's conscience. For weeks, he had been struggling with something he discovered, something that kept him awake at night, tossing and turning in his race car-themed bed. The truth began to emerge as Detective Sarah Miller, a 15-year veteran with kind eyes and graying hair at her temples, gently led the boy to a cozy room typically reserved for interviewing children. The walls were painted in soft blues, decorated with cheerful artwork, and filled with stuffed animals, a stark contrast to the serious conversation about to unfold. As the boy clutched a worn teddy bear from the room's collection, his story spilled out like water from an overflowing cup. His father, a respected local mechanic known for fixing cars at discount prices for struggling families, had been harboring a secret that his young son discovered quite by accident. It started 3 weeks ago when the boy was looking for his baseball glove in their garage. Behind stacked boxes and old paint cans, he found something unusual: dozens of letters, all addressed to elderly residents in their town and neighboring communities. At first, he thought nothing of it, but then he remembered overhearing his father on late-night phone calls, speaking in hushed tones about bank accounts and transfers. The pieces started coming together in his young mind like a puzzle he wished he'd never had to solve. His father, it seemed, had been intercepting mail from elderly residents' mailboxes, specifically targeting letters from banks and credit card companies. The boy didn't understand all the details, but he knew enough from school presentations about right and wrong to recognize that something wasn't right. What troubled him most wasn't just the letters. It was the names he recognized among them, including Mrs. Thompson, his elderly neighbor who always shared fresh-baked cookies with him after school. The weight of this knowledge had been crushing him. At night he'd lie awake, listening to his father's footsteps in the garage, the sound of papers shuffling, and quiet phone conversations that stopped whenever he appeared. He'd watched his father help these same people during the day, fixing their cars with a smile, while secretly taking advantage of their trust. Detective Miller noticed how the boy's hands trembled as he described finding one particular letter addressed to his former Sunday school teacher, an 80-year-old widow who lived alone. That was the moment he knew he had to do something. The previous night, he'd overheard his father planning something bigger, something that made his stomach twist into knots. The station's child psychologist, Dr. Chen, who had been quietly observing, noted how the boy showed remarkable emotional intelligence for his age. He wasn't acting out of anger or revenge. His actions came from a place of genuine concern for others and a deep-seated sense of justice that somehow survived intact despite his challenging circumstances. As the morning wore on, more details emerged about the scope of the situation. Officer Rodriguez, who had known the family for years through community outreach programs, struggled to reconcile the image of the hard-working single father he knew with the picture that was now taking shape. The complexity of human nature had never been more apparent, how someone could be both a loving father and something else entirely. The boy's courage was particularly remarkable given what he stood to lose. His father was his only remaining parent, his anchor in a world that had already taken his mother away. Every officer in that room understood that this child wasn't just reporting a crime. He was potentially sacrificing his own stability and security for the greater good. Meanwhile, in another part of the station, officers were quietly mobilizing. The boy's father was still at his auto shop, unaware that his son had just set in motion a series of events that would change their lives forever. But there was something else, something in the boy's voice that suggested he hadn't told them everything yet. As Detective Miller prepared to ask her next question, she noticed the boy glancing anxiously at his backpack, as if it contained one final piece to this already heartbreaking puzzle. What the officers discovered that morning would not only challenge their professional experience, but also touch their hearts in unexpected ways. The boy's story unfolded like a puzzle, each piece revealing a deeper truth about family, moral courage, and the wisdom that sometimes comes from the most unexpected sources. As the child spoke, the hardened police officers found themselves exchanging glances, moved by the pure intentions behind his desperate act. The most remarkable aspect wasn't just what the boy had done, but why he had done it. In a world where we often hear about children being led astray or making poor choices, here was a young soul who understood right from wrong with crystal clarity. His actions would soon ripple through the community, touching lives far beyond the walls of that police station. But perhaps the most profound part of this story lies in what happened next. A series of events that would challenge our assumptions about family, redemption, and the power of truth told through the eyes of a child. As news spread through the town, people began to question their own beliefs about judgment, forgiveness, and the complex bonds between parents and children. Standing there in the police station with his superhero t-shirt and scuffed sneakers, this young boy had no idea that his brave decision would spark a chain of events that would impact not just his family, but an entire community. His story serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the biggest acts of courage come from the smallest hearts, and that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. As the officers began to process what they were hearing, none of them could have predicted how this story would unfold or how it would challenge everything they thought they knew about family dynamics and moral choices. The real question wasn't just why this young boy wanted his father arrested. It was what happened next that would leave everyone speechless. Detective Miller's instincts about the backpack proved correct. With trembling hands, the boy unzipped the main compartment and pulled out a crumpled envelope. Inside was a handwritten list of names, addresses, and what appeared to be bank account numbers. But that wasn't what made the detective's breath catch in her throat. Beneath the list was a detailed plan for what looked like a massive scheme targeting the local senior center's upcoming charity fundraiser. The annual Golden Years Gala was more than just a fundraiser. It was the biggest social event for the town's elderly community. Hundreds of seniors would be there, many bringing donations and checks to support the center's programs. The boy had overheard his father on the phone the night before, discussing plans to exploit the event's payment processing system. The scheme would have affected not just individual seniors, but the entire community support system for its elderly residents. Officer Rodriguez noticed how the boy's shoulders tensed as he explained finding the envelope in his father's home office. He'd waited until his father was in the shower that morning, quickly stuffed it into his backpack, and made the decision that would bring him to the police station. The officer couldn't help but think about his own son, wondering if he would have the same moral courage in such a situation. As the investigation team quietly assembled in another room, they discovered something even more disturbing. The father's auto shop wasn't just a cover, it was an integral part of the operation. He had been using his legitimate business to gain trust and access to his victims' personal information. When elderly customers brought their cars in for repairs, they often left registration papers and other documents in their vehicles, never suspecting their trusted mechanic would betray them. The boy's voice grew quieter as he revealed the final piece of information that had pushed him to act. Yesterday afternoon, he'd seen his father meeting with two unfamiliar men behind the auto shop. They were discussing something about going bigger and expanding operations. The thought of more people getting hurt, especially the kind elderly neighbors who had helped fill the void left by his mother's absence, became too much to bear. Dr. Chen observed how the boy would occasionally touch a small keychain attached to his backpack. A photo of him and his father from happier times, fishing at the local lake. The psychologist recognized this gesture as self-soothing behavior, a child trying to hold on to good memories while doing something that threatened to shatter them forever. Time was now critical. The Golden Years Gala was scheduled for that very evening. Detective Miller knew they needed to move carefully. They had to stop the scheme without creating panic at what was supposed to be a joyous community event. But there was another concern weighing heavily on everyone's minds: how to protect the boy when his father realized who had exposed the operation. As officers prepared to move in on the auto shop, the boy suddenly remembered something that made his face go pale. His father had mentioned having backup plans if anything went wrong, including documents that would implicate innocent people if he ever got caught. The stakes were even higher now. It wasn't just about stopping a crime, but preventing innocent people from being falsely accused. Detective Miller watched through the observation window as the boy sat with Dr. Chen, his small frame seeming to carry the weight of the world. In just a few hours, multiple lives would change forever, and a child's brave decision would ripple through the community in ways nobody could fully predict. But as the team prepared to execute their plan, they had no idea that the biggest shock was yet to come. As officers prepared to move in on the auto shop, An unexpected call crackled through the police radio. The father had already left his workplace. A patrol unit reported seeing his familiar blue pickup truck, heading not toward the senior center as expected, but in the direction of the town's only private airstrip. The stakes suddenly shifted from preventing a local scam to stopping what appeared to be a carefully planned escape. The boy's eyes widened with recognition when he heard this news. He remembered fragments of conversations he tried to ignore, his father talking about fresh starts and asking him last week how he'd feel about living somewhere warmer. What seemed like casual dinner table chat now carried a much darker meaning. The realization hit him. His father had been preparing for this moment, perhaps knowing that his secret couldn't stay hidden forever. Detective Miller's team discovered that a small private plane had been chartered for that afternoon, paid for in cash 3 days ago. The timing wasn't coincidental. It aligned perfectly with the planned charity event. The scheme at the senior center wasn't just about stealing from the elderly. It was meant to be a final big score before disappearing completely. But there was something else bothering the young boy, something that made him fidget nervously with his shoelaces. 2 nights ago, he'd seen his father hiding something in their backyard, under the old oak tree where they used to have picnics. He hadn't mentioned it earlier because he wasn't sure it was important, but now every detail mattered. As he described the spot, Officer Rodriguez remembered something crucial. That area was just a few hundred yards from the town's main water supply. The investigation suddenly split into 2 urgent priorities: stopping a potential fugitive and investigating what might be hidden near critical infrastructure. Time was running out, and resources were stretched thin. The boy, who had shown such remarkable courage already, now faced an even harder decision. He needed to help the police search his own home, knowing each discovery could further incriminate the father he still loved. As one team raced toward the airstrip, another began a careful search of the family's property. The boy walked them through his home, each step feeling like a betrayal but driven by an understanding beyond his years that doing the right thing sometimes hurts. In his father's bedroom closet, behind a false panel the boy had discovered during hide and seek, they found something that changed the entire scope of the investigation. Stacked neatly in boxes were dozens of hard drives and documents, revealing that the senior center scheme was just the tip of the iceberg. His father had been part of something much larger, a network that stretched across state lines. The local scams were a cover for a more sophisticated operation, one that explained the frequent out-of-town trips his father claimed were for car parts. But the real shock came when they reached the backyard. Under the old oak tree, wrapped in waterproof material and buried 2 feet deep, was a single USB drive and a handwritten letter. The letter's first line made Detective Miller's blood run cold. "If you're reading this, then my son made a choice I always hoped he would." The father had known. Somehow, he had known this day might come, and he had prepared for it in a way nobody could have anticipated. As the officers at the airstrip reported that the blue pickup truck had been found abandoned, a new alert came in that would throw everything they thought they knew into question. Whatever came next would test not just a young boy's courage, but the very foundations of everything he believed about his family. The USB drive contained something nobody expected: a detailed confession, but not just from the father. It revealed a complex web of corruption involving several prominent community figures who had been forcing vulnerable people, including the father, to participate in their schemes. The confession included video evidence showing how these influential individuals had threatened families of those who refused to cooperate. The father's involvement hadn't begun with greed. It had started with fear and escalated when he tried to protect his son from their threats. Detective Miller watched the boy's face as they explained the situation in terms he could understand. His father, while not innocent, had been caught in something much bigger than himself. The abandoned truck at the airstrip wasn't an escape attempt. It was a carefully planned distraction. While everyone's attention was focused there, his father had walked into the town hall during their emergency meeting, carrying a final piece of evidence that would expose everyone involved. The letter under the oak tree continued, "Son, by the time you read this, I'll have turned myself in. Your courage in coming to the police gave me the strength to do what I should have done months ago. I couldn't tell you the truth because they were watching us, but I've been working with the FBI for the past month, gathering evidence against the real criminals. As if on cue, FBI agents arrived at the police station, confirming everything. The father hadn't fled. He was now in protective custody after delivering crucial evidence that would dismantle a criminal organization that had been terrorizing vulnerable families across 3 states. The Golden Years Gala scheme wasn't going to be his final score. It was intended to be his way of exposing the entire operation. Officer Rodriguez brought the boy to a secure room where his father waited. The reunion was tearful, complicated by a mix of relief, hurt, and understanding that would take time to fully process. The father, though facing consequences for his own actions, had ultimately chosen to follow his son's example of courage. He explained how watching his son grow up with such a strong moral compass had made him realize he needed to break free from the criminal web, no matter the cost. But the story wasn't over. As the FBI began arrests across town, they discovered that the criminal organization had planted false evidence in the homes of several families, including the boys. A race against time began to find and secure this evidence before it could be used to discredit the testimonies of those who had come forward. The boy remembered something crucial: a loose floorboard in his treehouse where he'd once seen his father hide something. Inside, they found documents that proved the innocence of several other families who had been forced into cooperation. His childhood hideout had unknowingly been protecting truth and justice all along. As evening fell, the Golden Years Gala continued as planned, but with undercover agents ensuring everyone's safety. The father's evidence had prevented not just a local scam, but had protected elderly communities across the country from similar schemes. The boy who had walked into the police station that morning had set in motion events that would help countless families break free from cycles of coercion and fear. Later that night, as the boy sat with Dr. Chen, he pulled out a crumpled photo from his pocket, the same one from his keychain. Behind it was a hidden message his father had written months ago. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't standing up to others. It's standing up for what's right, even when it hurts. You taught me that. The boy who had come to arrest his father had ended up helping to save him instead, proving that courage, love, and truth can come wrapped in unexpected packages. 6 months later, the small town had changed in subtle but significant ways. The father, after serving a reduced sentence for his cooperation, was now working with law enforcement to help other families caught in similar situations. His auto shop, under new management, had become a symbol of second chances, employing people who needed fresh starts of their own. The boy returned to a normal life, though his classmates regarded him with a quiet sort of respect they couldn't quite explain. His teacher noticed he stood a little taller during their lessons about civic duty and doing what's right. During show and tell, he brought in a newspaper clipping about anonymous tips leading to justice, carefully avoiding mentioning his own role in the story that had changed their community. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor who had always shared cookies, never knew she had been a potential victim. Instead, she found herself receiving more frequent visits from both father and son, who would help with her garden or small home repairs. These visits were their way of making amends, though she simply saw it as neighborly kindness. The Golden Years Gala became an annual event with a new focus, celebrating community heroes of all ages. The boy's story, though never publicly shared to protect his privacy, inspired a children's program teaching young people about ethical decision-making and the importance of speaking up when something feels wrong. Dr. Chen helped develop the program, incorporating lessons learned from that remarkable autumn morning. Detective Miller kept the letter from under the oak tree in her desk drawer, a reminder that cases aren't always what they seem, and that courage can wear many faces. She occasionally saw the boy and his father at the local diner, rebuilding their relationship over chocolate milkshakes and honest conversations. Their bond, though tested, had emerged stronger, forged in the fire of truth and redemption. The FBI's investigation led to reforms in how financial institutions protect elderly clients, with several banks implementing new security measures based on the lessons learned from this case. The criminal organization's downfall sparked a nationwide conversation about community protection and the importance of looking out for society's most vulnerable members. Officer Rodriguez started a support group for families healing from similar situations, creating a safe space where people could share their stories and find strength and unity. The boy's father became a regular speaker, his experience helping others recognize the warning signs of coercion and the importance of reaching out for help. The old treehouse, once a hiding place for secrets, was transformed into a reading nook where father and son spent weekend afternoons sharing stories and rebuilding trust. They added a small plaque inside that read, "Truth starts here," their private joke about how a child's hideout had helped uncover the truth that set them free. As for the boy, he learned that heroism isn't always about grand gestures or dramatic rescues. Sometimes it's about small choices made in difficult moments, about standing up for what's right even when it feels impossible. His father learned that redemption often comes through the eyes of those who believe in us, even when we've lost faith in ourselves. The town's story became a quiet legend, passed around in coffee shops and community meetings, not for its drama, but for its lesson about how courage and truth, even from the smallest and most unexpected sources, can ripple outward to touch countless lives. And in the end, a boy who walked into a police station asking them to arrest his father had actually helped set him free, free from fear, free from deception, and free to become the parent he was meant to be. Some stories end with a bang, others with a whisper. This one ended with a father and son sitting on their porch steps, sharing ice cream cones on a warm spring evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors of hope and new beginnings.